This is Kyle Weintraub with Orange Focus Media. And I just kindly ask to please like and subscribe for more educational content. I really think you guys are going to get something out of this video today. And welcome to my introductory exclusive series, The Search for the Hardest Money. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the monetary history of the United States and also a little bit of a dive into fiat currency itself. And in episode 2, we're going to be looking into Bitcoin and why I think it is an amazing solution. So before we jump in here, I want to go through a little prerequisite. So what causes inflation? So it's very important that we look at this equation here. So tax revenue must equal government spending. And so we all pay our taxes to the government, and the government spends their money on roads, things like defense, school, social programs for the elderly, police officers, right? All inherently good things. We want to spend our money on these things. But the issue occurs when our tax revenue does not equal government spending. And so I'm just going to use a quick example from the Roman Empire that we'll dissect a little bit further here in a sec. And I'm simplifying this example quite a bit here, but during the Roman Empire, they, for example, only took in 3 gold coins of tax revenue, but they had 5 gold coins of government spending. And so they had basically 3 options. They could cut the spending, right? They could get rid of these 2 gold coins here. They could increase the tax revenue. They could tax their citizens more. Or there's the sneaky third option that they can mix the gold coins with copper, dilute them, and then get more gold coins out of it, and then equal out the equation, okay? Now I want to take a second here. The option 1 and option 2 are very bad for politics, right? If a politician comes out and he says, hey, we're going to cut spending, we're going to axe all the schools, we're going to axe all the roads, please vote for me, right? They're probably not going to get many votes. So that's not a good option. And then option 2, increasing tax revenue, saying, hey guys, everyone's tax rate is now 40%, right? That's not going to get a lot of votes either. So every politician throughout the course of history goes with option 3. They mix the gold coins with copper. And it creates a increase in the currency supply. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. So at the start of the Roman Empire, the coinage they used was pure silver. They used pure silver gold coins for a very solid amount of their history until things started to, start to fall in Rome, and the government started spending more money than they were getting in taxes. And then you could see that basically by the end of the Roman Empire, their currency had no silver or gold left in it. They were just using copper coins, right? The government was spending more money than it was taking in tax revenue. And so the money itself had no inherent value, right? They were just trading copper coins at that point. And so here I just denoted, right? This is what would be considered sound money on the top here. Money that is not debased with any sort of other metals. It is just sound, it works. And the term sound money comes from the actual sound a silver or gold coin makes. And that's how people would actually test to see if there was any copper mixed in them in the day. And then on the bottom here, we have a fiat currency where there is no actual silver or gold content in these coins. And they are just, fiat actually stands for let there be in Latin. And so that just means let there be money. There really isn't anything saying that it is money, right? There is no sort of asset value to it. And so another quick prerequisite before we jump in here. So it's really important to note that the economy soaks up inflation. And inflation for this sense would mean money printing. But so we're going to take 2 hypothetical examples here. We have economy A on the top here and economy B at the bottom here. And economy A, these are the only 3 goods in existence in the economy, right? And then there is 100 money units. So, a house would be 80 money units. A car would be 15 money units. A steak would be 5 money units. And then economy B has, 1,000 money units. So a house is 800 money units, a car is 150 money units, and a steak is 50 money units. And so it's just important to note that, if all things are equal, inflation will find its way into assets, right? This is pretty simple. I think most people know this, but it's just important to understand that when money is printed and the currency supply increases, these assets go up in money unit terms, okay? So with that all, let's jump in here. Let's look at the monetary history of the United States. So before America was founded, there was no nationally recognized money or currency. Settlers just used foreign gold coins and what was known as commodity currency to exchange goods and services. Some colonies also issued their own forms of paper fiat currency, but none of them were actually really traded. And the most commonly traded things were the Spanish real coin. This was very common. The British shilling coin. And then also beaver fur and tobacco leaf. So, I would consider this like a step above a barter economy. So beaver fur was very popular back then to keep warm. There wasn't much heaters around then. And then tobacco leaf, everyone was smoking cigarettes back then, and then British shilling coins and Spanish real coins, and these were very easy to test to make sure that they were real. And so then we all kind of know what happened in 1776, right? So to fund the Revolutionary War against the British, the Continental Congress, which was the Congress of the United States at the time, issued the paper fiat currency called the Continental Dollar. Now, the Continental Dollar went into a hyperinflation and mass counterfeiting, causing the currency to collapse within 6 years, right? And going back to that equation, obviously funding a war against the British is very expensive. So they had to print a lot of these dollars without taking a lot of them in, thus creating a large supply of currency. And so just for example here, the money supply of the Continental Dollar started at $2 million, and then by the end in 1781 there was over $200 million printed, right? So you can just imagine that's a 100x inflation rate over the course of just 6 years. So this was a very tough time for the American people. And so from 1771 to 1792, this was really actually a period of the Confederate United States, right? The United States was founded on the idea of states owning as much as they could within the economy. And so the states actually began issuing their own independent paper fiat currencies. And so most of these state currencies ended up going into hyperinflation. And this also created a very complex and unstable monetary system, because you could imagine if you were traveling from Massachusetts to Rhode Island, you're going to have to exchange your Massachusetts dollars for Rhode Island dollars, and there's different exchange rates, and it's very confusing, right? So this system did not last long. This system lasted 11 years, and then there was the entire United States needed something new. And so then, due to that instability, states began, they all voted for the Coinage Act of 1792, which put the entire United States on a gold exchange standard. And therefore, all currency could not be printed with no asset backing, right? We wanted to stop this inflation taking place. And this was actually the longest period of a stable monetary system in the United States. There was virtually no inflation. People just traded physical gold and silver coins, right? And there was ways to test these gold coins to make sure there was no other metal content in them, or, counterfeited gold coins. And so these were the most popular coins at the time. There was the $10 gold Liberty head and the $1 silver seated eagle coin. All right, and so let's jump forward here. So we all kind of know what happened in the 1860s. So there was the Civil War. And so the Union created their own currency called the greenback, and the Confederacy created their own currency called the Confederate dollar. And to fund the war on both sides, they each needed to go into extreme deficit spending. And this is why we hopped off of the gold exchange standard and went on to a temporary fiat standard for both the Union and the Confederacy. Now, the Confederate dollar was very short-lived. It only lasted about 4 years, while the greenback was used for a relatively long time after the Civil War. And because it was a fiat currency and it could be printed at infinitum, the greenback ended up going into a hyperinflation, and that lasted up until 1879. And so with this, they called this the Resumption Act of 1875, and this brought us back onto a classical gold standard, just a little bit different than before, where 1 ounce of gold was equal to $20, right? So in other words, $1 equaled 1/20th of an ounce of gold. Very simple fractional equation. But this period saw the beginnings of a paper-backed derivative of gold called the dollar bill, right? And remember, people were just before then on the gold standard trading gold coins. Now we have introduced a paper-backed derivative of the gold coins. And so these were not issued by a large federal bank. These were issued by private banks. And these were to act as paper claims sitting on the gold that you had in your bank account, right? You can imagine giving the bank 5 gold coins, and then they would hand you back, $100 if they were 1 ounce gold coins. And so this was the main money that was actually being used, where they were called bank notes. That's where actually the term comes from. That's what you see on the currencies, is their claims to the actual money. This isn't the actual money, you're just trading the claims to the money. So here you can see an example from the Torrington Bank $5 note, and then here from the Villisca Bank for a $50 note. And so then in 1913, another war comes around. And so this was the beginnings of central banking in the United States. And so this was a very complicated time in U.S. monetary history, so just stick with me now. So World War I led to a large increase in deficit spending that was just previously not possible under a gold standard, right? Because if you're issuing currency and it has to be backed by the gold in the bank, you're not going to be able to print a whole lot of currency. And so this is when the Federal Reserve was created, which is the central bank of the United States. And the Federal Reserve decided to issue their own notes called Federal Reserve Notes that were backed by 40% gold and 60% assets. And I put that in quotes there because no one really knows what these assets are. It's just they call them assets. And this marked the beginnings of what is known as fractional reserve banking, where you have less gold in the vaults than you do paper derivatives of the gold in the vaults. And so here you can see there was actually also the gold certificate as well back then, where these notes were 100% gold backed. So, just taking an example here, this one's 40% gold backed. So you would go in and you would only get $20 worth of gold with this note if you went to the bank. But with this note, you would get the full amount back in gold. Okay, and so you can actually kind of see that written on the note there, that redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury, or in gold or lawful money. So right there, lawful money. No one really knows what lawful money means, but that's just what it means, right? It's only 40% backed by gold, 60% backed by quote unquote lawful money. Okay, and so then let's move forward here. I call this period from 1933 to 1971 the Great Rug Pull. And so this was, of course, the start of the Great Depression, which was a very tough time for the American people. And then, even furthermore, FDR released Executive Order 6102, which made it illegal for anyone to hold any physical amount of monetary gold, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. And so let's think why this was done. This was done because the Federal Reserve wanted to take all of that gold into the vaults so then it could fractionally reserve out more dollars into existence. And this was done to get us out of the Great Depression and then very soon after fund World War II. And so it's also, I wanted to make a quick side note here that gold was redeemable on demand by foreign countries at this time, but not domestically. Remember, by 1933, gold is completely illegal to own. You get caught holding gold, you can get punished by 10 years in prison. It's pretty crazy to think that happened back then. And so after the U.S. won World War II was when gold was revalued to $35 an ounce to make up for the inflation that occurred during all of that money printing. And so the world was then pegged to the dollar. And so, again, they took in all that gold. They printed a ton of paper representing that gold, way more paper than the actual gold in the vaults. And then, right after that, right after World War II, they said, hey, gold is not worth $20 an ounce. Gold is now worth $35 an ounce, right? Because there's more paper that was printed. All right. And then here we go. So if you can see on here, this was a Federal Reserve note. This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and this is redeemable in lawful money, right? No one really knows what lawful money is, right? This is the lawful money, right? You should be holding the lawful money. But, right, and so notice how gold is nowhere to be seen on this note, right? So we are basically, in this period of time, going off of the gold standard. And so then that leads us to 1971 until today. So in 1971, this period is known as the Nixon shock. Richard Nixon shocked the world. He completely suspended all redeemability of dollars to gold. And so this officially unpegged the dollar from any sort of physical asset. Therefore, we put the entire world on a fiat standard. And this allowed for unlimited credit expansion. And I think we all know what that means, right? That means a lot of inflation. And you can see here I put a chart of, what the dollar is worth from, 1913 to now, and you can see it's down really quite a bit. And that's because the dollar can be printed at infinitum, right? There is no sort of accountability for the Federal Reserve to not just continue to print dollars, right? They don't have any gold in the vaults that's representing those dollars. And so, right, this follows what I mentioned in the beginning of the series, right? That, look at what happened to the debasement of their silver coins, right? It started off as sound money, just pure gold or silver. And then by the end of it, they were using copper coins, which are no different than the paper currencies that we're using today. So it's just important to understand these things. And so that is what fiat money is. Fiat money is not represented by any sort of physical asset. And so I just wanted to take a quick second here to circle back to what I first mentioned in the beginning of this episode. Right? What causes money supply growth? Tax revenue must equal government spending. And so, right now the United States spends a lot of money on our defense. We spend a lot of money on schools, social programs for the elderly, police officers, roads, all these kinds of things. These are good things. We want these things. But the problem is that in the United States, our tax revenue does not equal the government spending. And so, I exchanged these gold coins for dollars, and you can see, they have three options, just like the Romans did. They can cut spending, they can increase their taxes, they could get more dollars in the taxes, or they have that third option, right? They can print the money. And so option 1 and 2 are not good politically, because no politician is going to say, hey guys, we're actually going to axe all the schools. And, we don't really need the Defense Department, right? No one's going to do that. And then increasing taxes, no one's going to run a campaign on, hey guys, everyone's taxes are now 50%, right? That's not going to win an election. And so all the politicians always end up choosing the third option of printing money, okay? And so let's understand just how fast they print this money, right? And these are real stats from 2024. So in 2024, the Federal Reserve printed $2.3 trillion in that year. That equals $6.3 trillion per day, or $72,000 per second. So, right, I just want you to wrap your head around how much money they're printing. Right, you might be making a great salary of $100,000, $200,000 a year, But guys, that's 3 seconds of money printing for the government. Okay, so this is a huge problem. This is why when you go to the grocery store, everything is more expensive. This is why houses are more expensive. So I'll jump into that actually deeper in a second, but gold holds its value because it cannot be printed, it's rare, and it has intrinsic value. It's very hard to find gold. Mining gold is a time-consuming, expensive, and sometimes not worthwhile process. You might not find gold when you go mining for it. So it has extreme, rarity and intrinsic value, and that's why it holds its value so well, and it only increases in supply by about 1% a year. So let's kind of look at what this money printing looks like, right? So here we have a graph of the S&P 500, right? And so from 2016 just to now, 2024, and you can see how much this has gone up, right? It's basically tripled in 10 years. And, there's going to be people in the comments saying, hey, no, that's the economy growing. Well, I hate to doubt you, and we'll look into why it's not the economy growing here in a second. It's just money being printed and then going from, the hands of, poor people to the hands of rich people and then into the stock market. That's what's happening. And then we can look at the average car price. This is shooting up. And now cars might be getting a little bit better in technology, but trust me, they're not that much better. And that's why that's shooting up in value. Look at the average home price, right? We were below $250,000 in 2016, and now we're almost at $450,000 today. And that is not because houses are getting better or they're going up in value. I mean, just think about that statement, that a house is going up in value. It's the same house, right? There's no value being added to the house. What's happening is the dollar is losing value. And you can see that with gold, right? The price of gold, of course, is shooting up, and it's maintaining its purchasing power throughout time because, right, gold is rare. It's just like these other assets above here. It's going to, right, when money is put into the economy, the assets then go up in value. And so then let's just look at this with a different lens. Let's look at the S&P 500 in ounces of gold coins. You can see that the S&P 500 is flat. It's actually down a little bit. So S&P 500 is not going up in value, right? That's not what's happening. It's just that money's being printed. Let's look at the average vehicle price, in ounces of gold. And you can see here that it's actually going down quite a bit. So this is just money being printed. And then let's look at the average house in ounces of gold. And you can see that the average house is also down in ounces of gold. So if you just shift your lens from using dollars as your measure to ounces of gold, you'll get much better clarity on, the actual price of things rather than just money being printed. All right, so that is the core focus of this episode that I want you to take away, is that the things we buy are not getting more expensive. The dollars we use are losing value and being printed. Okay, I'm just going to say that one more time here. The things we buy are not getting more expensive. The dollars we use are losing value and being printed. So when you go to the grocery store, don't say to yourself, man, that thing's getting more expensive. Say to yourself, man, my dollars are becoming worthless. Because when you go to the cash register, remember that the grocery store is buying your dollars from you. All right? Shift your lens a bit. Alrighty, so thank you for watching episode 1. I'm Kyle Weintraub with Orange Focus Media, and throw a like, throw a comment, throw a subscribe. Everything helps, and I just want to shed light on the economy and help demystify the world around us. And so in episode 2, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Bitcoin, and I hope I see you there. Thank you.